Welcome to this edition of World Business Commentary. My name is Belinda Boggs and my co-host is Kristen Ciccarello. Today's topic is about remote work. Is remote work history? Are we going back to 2019? Lots of our largest global corporations are enforcing return to office. In a previous episode, we discussed a Fortune magazine article that talked about the forced resignation of a Bloomberg employee named Kelly. Today's episode will answer two questions. 1. What is the real reason companies are pushing for workers to return to the office? And 2. Is remote work really ending? We've heard a lot about collaboration and productivity as the reasons for bringing employees back into the office. Kristen, can you talk about this? Is there any merit to the idea that workers are more productive in the office?
Thanks. I love this topic. Let me begin by saying that there's no evidence to suggest that workers are more productive in the office. The reason I say that is twofold. First, many of these tech companies absolutely thrived during the remote work period. Second, the best they could come up with in trying to prove the superiority of in-office work was from the article we cited in the last episode on this topic. The article talked about a study done by a few little-known economists. Let me quote from it again. Quote, "They studied engineers at a Fortune 500 company. When COVID-19 shuttered the company's offices, the researchers found that engineers who previously worked in teams housed in the same building received 70% less feedback on their work than when they worked together in person. As office closures scattered staff, they helped each other less." Unquote. Now, if this is the best they can come up with, they're in major trouble. This study does nothing to support the idea that remote work is less productive. First of all, the study was based on a single company. Even a high school statistics student would tell you that you can't use this small of a sample and apply the findings to every company. Secondly, this study does nothing to bolster the idea that productivity suffers. The study said that there was less feedback. So what? If we grant the idea that more feedback is better, then we can design as much feedback as we want into the system, remote or not remote. This has nothing to do with proximity.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. But why do companies insist on enforcing return to office policies? How does it benefit them?
I've been scratching my head trying to figure this one out for a while. Interestingly, in the article we talked about last time, someone made an interesting comment, and I did a little research. Here's the comment from someone named Scooter. Quote, "Why the push for RTO? Taxes and real estate values are the main drivers. Empty or low-occupied office buildings aren't worth a whole lot, and many companies have built headquarters and received tax breaks with the promise of a certain number of workers occupying the building. Don't fall for the collaboration argument. That's a red herring." Interesting, right? So, I decided to do a little research and find out if our friend Scooter is onto something. By the way, for you out there watching on YouTube, if you like what you've heard so far, please subscribe to our channel and give us a big thumbs up.
Great. Now back to this idea of tax incentives. What did you find out? Was Scooter right?
Well, as it turns out, Scooter is onto something. I found an article that talks about this. Funny enough, it comes from Bloomberg. Allow me to quote the relevant portion. Quote, "Many tax incentives hinge on employees coming to the office. Officials are deciding whether to enforce them as downtowns bear the cost of hybrid work arrangements." Later, it says, "Of the billions in tax incentives granted to U.S. companies every year by cities and states, many agreements require workers to come into the office some of the time, or at least live in the region. For companies receiving these incentives, relaxing in-office attendance could be costly."
Wow. To quote Johnny Carson, I did not know that. Could that be it? Could companies be looking to cash in on tax breaks?
Good question. I think it might have something to do with the push to return to the office. However, if you look further down into the article, it talks about different policies in different locations. For example, the state of California gives incentives as long as the employee lives in the state. They don't care whether they come into the office. In New Jersey, under the so-called Emerge initiative, employers must prove that 80% of eligible employees' work time is spent in the state, and that they have enough space to accommodate at least half of their workforce on site.
Interesting.
The article talks about other states as well. The bottom line is that many of the states are trying to change the tax incentives to be more flexible. They want the employees to remain in state, but they don't necessarily need to return to the office.
What about cities? Are their policies different?
Glad you asked. Here's a relevant quote from the article. Quote, "Compared to states, cities have much more to win or lose depending on where workers live and whether they commute downtown and buy lunch at the local deli. The ultimate fear is that without these workers, cities might drop into an urban doom loop, retail and property taxes dry up, commercial real estate values slump, social services are cut and crime spikes." Notice above this quote in the article there is a picture of a city that has been hit particularly hard, San Francisco. So, my conclusions from the article are that state legislatures are open to remote work and will not stand in the way, but cities would be in trouble. I think this particularly affects large, densely populated cities like New York and San Francisco, for example.
Great work. So, based on this, is remote work dead? Is it dead because cities need to have enough tax revenue?
I don't believe so. I think remote work is here to stay, for the reasons I cited in our last episode on the topic. Companies thrived, workers thrived, that's really what counts. I firmly believe that we shouldn't fight technological progress with legislation. Remote work is a good thing for several reasons. Work-life balance, carbon emissions, traffic, reduced office rental cost, etc. Whenever a new technology disrupts, things like this happen. Instead of trying to fight it, cities need to adjust. It just so happens that there is a housing crisis. Not enough housing. So, my recommendation is that cities should accept the fact that less office real estate will be needed. In response, they should create incentives so that builders can convert these buildings into residential housing. This represents an opportunity to meet a need. We discussed the housing shortage at length in a previous episode, as I'm sure you recall. Now, one final thing I'd like to say is about change management. Companies are trying to change people's life from working from home back to the office. The only way this change would work is if they offered a compelling reason, and they haven't. People always need a legitimate reason for change, and there really isn't one.
Wow. That's great stuff. Well, you heard it here first. Remote work is not dead. First, there is no evidence that productivity suffers due to remote work. Second, while there are tax incentives in some locations to keep offices full, this is being changed by state legislatures. And cities will have to make similar changes. The good news for them is that they can use this as an opportunity to create much-needed housing. Finally, to your point on change management, people need a good reason to change back to working in the office, and they haven't been given one. That's our segment for today. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed it.